Hey, what's up everybody? In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your images go from looking like this to this. And the only thing I changed was the lighting. Lighting is one of the key elements to creating cinematic images and is one of the biggest factors that separates amateur looking films from professional looking films. Now, I recently saw a post on the Facebook group of one of our members asking, why does my image look flat and washed out, but this image that I pulled off of an ad I just watched looks super cinematic? What are they doing that I'm not doing to get that cinematic look? And the answer is lighting. And we'll talk about how lighting can create depth to make your images look more three-dimensional and cinematic. Now, there are four main characteristics of light that I want to cover: direction, color, quantity, and quality. Now, because there's so much to cover, I'm actually going to split this up into two videos. In this video, part one, we're going to be covering direction of light and briefly talking about light color as well. And then in video two, we'll talk about light quality versus light quantity. Now, it's important to know these different elements because oftentimes people think that the lighting is bad simply because there's not enough light or light quantity. But there's many situations where you have enough light, but the lighting still looks bad. And that's usually because the light is too hard instead of soft, light quality, or the direction of light might be unflattering, or the color of light might be unflattering. So we're going to go over all four elements and how they affect your image. First, let's talk about direction of light. Depending on where you position your lights, the shadows will allow you to form different shapes or patterns on your subject. So using a basic three-point light setup, we're going to go over 5 common lighting patterns and when you'd want to use them. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with three-point lighting consists of 3 lights around your subject: a key light, a backlight, and a fill light. The key light is your main light that is used to light up your subject, and depending on where you place this key light will depend on the look or light pattern that it gives you. The most common placement of a key light is slightly above your subject and about 45 degrees from the camera off to one side. And the reason for this is because it creates shadows on the face, making your subject appear more three-dimensional and thus creating depth to your image. And as we talk about a lot in this course, creating depth is what helps images feel more cinematic and pop out from the screen. Be careful though, not all shadows are good. If you place your light too high, you'll start creating raccoon eyes on your subject. This generally isn't a very flattering look, and it kind of resembles shooting at noonday, which isn't the prettiest lighting to shoot in. But you also don't want to put the light too low, first of all, because light sources don't naturally come from below us, so it doesn't look very natural, but also because it gives you that flashlight around the campfire look that tends to be more of a spooky, scary feel. Plus, it highlights areas that aren't super flattering, like underneath the chin, the nostrils, the eyebrow ridge. So by having the light slightly above your subject, you create a nice drop shadow. Drop shadow meaning the shadow underneath the chin that outlines the jaw, which is typically a more flattering look and helps create dimension and depth. Especially if you're trying to hide a double chin, you want to make sure you put that light nice and high because it will shade the under chin. With this key light position, you also have the subject's eyes lit up nicely, which is usually the main part of the face that you want your audience to focus on. And if you look closely, you can actually see the light source's reflection in your subject's eye, and this is called a catch light. Having a strong catch light can help draw your viewer's attention to the subject and gives your subject that sparkle in the eye look. And depending on the shape of your key light, you can get a variety of shapes of catch lights in the eye. For example, if you use a square softbox or a window as your key light, you'll get more of a square catch light. If you're outside shooting and using light reflected off of surrounding objects, then you'll see those reflected objects in the catch light of your subject's eye. So those are just a couple things I look for when lighting my subject to help give them a more cinematic look. Now let's move the position of our key light to show you the 5 different lighting patterns and the effects they each have on your image. As we move the key light directly in front of our subject, we get an even flat look to our image, and this is called flat lighting. Flat lighting on the face will mean that your subject is well lit and you are unable to see any shadows along their face. This will give you the least dramatic look out of the 5 lighting patterns that we'll be talking about, and is often used for a more light-hearted setting like commercials or beauty shots that allow you to see every detail of the skin. This look doesn't give a lot of dimension or depth to your subject though, so isn't necessarily looked at as a more cinematic or dramatic option. Now, if we keep the light in the same spot but just raise it up slightly from the flat lighting position, we get what is called the Paramount or butterfly lighting. Paramount refers to Paramount Pictures, who used this as their signature lighting style when it came to shooting their leading actresses. And the word butterfly refers to the little shadow under the nose that the lighting position creates, and is shaped kind of like a butterfly. This lighting pattern is typically a more feminine lighting pattern because when used properly, the shadows will accentuate the cheekbones, creating depth to the face. But be careful with the height of your light on this look because if you bring it too low, you will lose the drop shadow under the chin along with the butterfly shadow under the nose, thus going back to a flatter two-dimensional image. And if you raise it too high, the eyebrow ridge will cover up your eyes, giving you raccoon eyes, and your butterfly shadow will start to crawl onto the lip, making for a weird, unwanted shadow on your mouth. But let's now move the light slightly to the side and you'll start to see that butterfly shadow turn into a side nose shadow. This lighting pattern is referred to as loop lighting because the nose shadow creates the shape of a loop on the cheek. And this lighting pattern is generally used on rounder faces as the shadows it creates helps the face seem slimmer and longer. And as we continue to move the light farther to the side, about 45 degrees from our camera, that nose shadow connects with the cheek shadow, creating the lighting pattern Rembrandt lighting. Rembrandt lighting gets its name from a Dutch painter named Rembrandt, who used this lighting pattern for many of his paintings, and this lighting pattern is known for creating a triangle of light on the cheek subject and is probably the most popular lighting pattern used in Hollywood films as it creates a dramatic, cinematic, three-dimensional depth to the subject's face. Now with Rembrandt lighting, depending on where you position your camera, you can get different looks as well. If you position your camera on the broader side of your subject, this is called broad light. And if you position your camera on the darker side of your subject, this is called short light or the dark side. And it's most common in cinema to shoot on the short or dark side as it creates more drama and depth. So generally speaking, like in this tutorial you're watching right now, I like to position my camera on the dark side of my subject for a more cinematic look. And according to Hollywood director Shane Hurlbut, the first rule in lighting over-the-shoulder scenes, which is when you have two subjects talking to each other, is you should always place your camera on the dark side of your subjects. Now let's move our key light 90 degrees or completely to the side of our subjects and you'll see the entire side of the face become shadowed. This is called split lighting because it splits the face in half, and this lighting pattern is used to create an even more dramatic look and is also popular in Hollywood films, especially during scenes that are meant to be super dramatic. And where paramount lighting is typically used to create a more feminine look, split lighting tends to make subjects look tougher and more masculine. So as you can see, just with the positioning of our one key light, we can create a wide range of looks and feels to our image. Let's now look at our second light of the 3-point light setup, and that is the backlight, or rim light, or hair light. Backlight because the light lights up the back, or if it's slightly higher, it becomes more of a hair light, or if it's more to the side, a rim light. Backlight, as we talk about in the natural lighting video, is commonly used during golden hour when the sun is low in the horizon and starting to set. So by using a backlight, we are replicating that golden hour look. Sources of backlight can oftentimes be practical lights as well, like a window or a lamp or anything in the background that looks natural to help light up the back of your subject. The purpose of backlight or rim light is to create a halo or rim around the outline of your subject to help separate them from the background and create depth, shape, and form. In my setup for this tutorial, I have the backlight positioned about 4 feet above me and pretty much directly behind me. So you can also play with the exact positioning of this light to create slightly different looks. Our third light in our 3-point light setup is the fill light. As the name states, the fill light fills in light, usually on the opposite side of your key light, making your shadows less dramatic. Depending on the mood of your story and or scene, you can choose to use a little or a lot of this fill light. The more fill light you use, the less contrast your image will have, and this is referred to as high key lighting, which is used more in comedies, romances, sitcoms, commercials, beauty shots, etc. It gives a more lighthearted, less dramatic look, whereas when you have less fill light, it creates more contrast, and this is referred to as low key lighting and is used in more dramatic scenarios and is generally looked at as more cinematic due to the added depth it gives your subject. Now, I rarely use fill light for my setups, but rather I just have my soft key light and the backlight, and if I need any fill, then I use my 5-in-1 reflector. But because I like more of the cinematic contrasty look, I actually rarely use any fill at all, and I'm not alone in this, as I've heard Shane Hurlbut mention that he never fills light from the opposite side side of his key light, so you can definitely get away with only using 2 lights and then just having a 5-in-1 reflector ready in case you want to fill. So there you have it. Those are the 3 main lights in a basic 3-point light setup and some of the light patterns that can be created. Now, one other thing to point out when lighting your subject is to make sure your subject isn't positioned flat up against the wall. Going back to the example at the beginning, the key differences between these 2 images were the lighting and the depth. The lighting helps create depth, but so does the position of your subject. On the top, the subject is farther removed from the camera and closer to the back wall, so it's harder to separate him from the background. Whereas the example on the bottom, the subject is much closer to the camera and there's a lot more distance between him and the wall. Not only will this allow you to get some depth of field and blur out your background more, but it will also make your subjects brighter than the background as your subjects get closer to your key light and your background gets farther away from the key light. Be careful though, unless you're going for a pitch black background look, you'll want to make sure you have some light on your background to give your audience some context as to where your subject is. This can either be done by allowing your other lights to spill on the background, or you could add another artificial light, lighting up just the background. Or you can use practical lights like windows or lamps or computer screens to help give the rest of your frame a little more life. And a common lighting pattern that can be created by using background light is called checkerboard lighting, which basically means that you light up the background on the dark side of the subject, but leave the background dark behind the bright side of your subject, creating a checkerboard effect. This method once again is used to create depth by contrasting the light and helping the subject pop from the background. To take it one step further, you can add a gel to your backlight to create some color contrast, which brings me to our second characteristic of light, which is color. We discussed this in the white balance video and how each light source has a different color temperature, so it's important to know what color temperature your light is and make sure your camera is set accordingly to get the right color balance in your image. But a great way to create depth and add to the cinematic quality of your video is to add color contrast. We talk about this more in the color grading video in the editing section, but color contrast basically means that your foreground and your background are different colors. So in this example here, I have my subject lit by 3200 Kelvin LED lights, and in the background I have a window letting in daylight at around 5600 Kelvin. This creates color contrast, which helps the subject stand out from the background. To create a similar look artificially, you can use gels to create different looks and color combinations. Like right now I'm being lit by 6000 Kelvin aperture dome light, have my camera set to 6000 Kelvin, and I have 2 LS Mini 20s with blue gels lighting the background. So with the background being lit with a much bluer light than is on me, it creates color contrast and helps me pop out from the background. And I chose blue to light up the background because my skin is an orange tone, which is complementary to blue, giving it that orange and teal look and making it much more cinematic. So again, here's how it looks without color gels. And here's how it looks with the color gels. So definitely a fun thing to add to make your images more cinematic. One thing to look out for though with color of light is light reflection off of colorful objects, giving an unwanted color cast to your image. For example, if you're shooting in a big grass field, you'll probably get the sun reflecting off of the grass onto your subject, creating a green tint on your subject. So just because your direction of light is good, in this case I'm shooting in the shade so I have even light, my light quantity is good because there's plenty of light outside, my light quality is nice as the sun reflects off the grass, acting as a giant diffuser and creating a nice soft light. But because it's reflecting off the green grass, our light color makes our subject look green and sick. Now, because there wasn't much I could do in this situation, I had to color correct in post by adding back some magenta. But the point is to be aware of the color of light as our second characteristic of light, because everything else about the light can be perfect, but if the color of light isn't flattering, it won't look good. But that's it for cinematic light shaping using direction and color of light. Hope you learned something new. Make sure to watch part 2 where I'll be discussing the difference between light quality and light quantity. If you have any further questions, please let me know.